Okay, so yeah, begin with, obviously this video, we're going to go over this idea of active reading. Remember, you are absolutely allowed highlighters in the exam. Do not highlight the question paper where you're actually writing. So if you write something in here, for instance, don't highlight that because the scanner won't pick it up. But for the source material, so the insert, you are absolutely allowed to highlight that to your heart's content, make notes on it, whatever. Okay, so going through, we're allowed 1 hour 15 minutes for this, and it does say you're advised to spend about 15 minutes reading through the source and all 5 questions you have to answer, and that is a good idea. Now, thankfully, the questions on the exam paper never change. What changes is the source material. We know that question 1 will always ask us to pick 4 things from the source. We know that question 2 will give us a chunk of the text and then ask us to analyze it in terms of language. We know that question 3 will be about the structure. And we know that question 4 will be this sort of essay question where you're expected to sort of argue a point about the atmosphere. It's always worth, however, just reading through, having a look here. So I know that I'm looking at this bit here, for instance. So I can find that in the, well, it tells me, doesn't it? Lines 5 to 15, I know is the language analysis section. So I can go in straight away, actually, and I can make a note here very quickly. So I'm just putting the sort of margin here, 5 to 15, question 2. So when I go back, I know that's what I'm looking for. I also know, for instance, that question 4, having read the question, is about it's about the extracts where the boys' game came to life takes a darker and more chilling tone. So before I even read the extract, what I can do is I can look at line 16. I can go through and I can just make myself a little note here. And that's just a handy little memo for me. Okay. So going through, I know that I am reading and I'm actively reading here and I'm looking for a bunch of different things. So first off, I am looking for language. And I'm really going to focus my sort of examination here on these lines 5 to 15, obviously, because that's what question 2 is asking of me. But I also know that for question 4, they may expect me to comment on language as well. So if I notice anything in particular with language use here, I'm going to highlight that. Now, for the purposes of this video and for purposes of brevity, I'm going to assume that I've already read this through. I've skim read it once, maybe taken 2, 3, 4 minutes. So now what I'm doing is I'm actively reading. I'm going through and I'm noting what I want to know. And a good trick here is to bring in more than one color highlighter. So for instance, I'm going to use green here for my language. So I know that I'm focusing on this bit here. So if I'm starting by looking at language, I might highlight these 2, green glass, broken brown. And I might make a little note in the margin here, alliteration. Okay. And I might put here as well, pushes glass into mounds, making houses, balancing roofs on them, building towers. Rule of 3. Quite interesting. And I might put here as well, because there's a lot of use of light in this extract as well. And that's sort of immediately got my attention. So the last of the sunlight. Now, I'm one of those people, what I tend to do is I tend to read the text and I tend to see what jumps out at me. And then I try and ascribe a language feature to it. You might do that the other way around. You might spot language features first and then think about how they work. Depends on how you work, obviously. Adapt it as you wish. Okay. So I'm going to mention here the orange light as well and the shadows. And I'm going to sort of put this down here. Focus. I'm going to put language used to disk light, because I think that's an important part of this. And that links back as well here, because what I am also going to do is, while I'm doing this, I'm also looking for structural elements. So I'm absolutely going to sort of, I'm going to start by just making a little note here. And I'm just going to put here, focus on light and twilight. Okay, because I've just noticed that as a bit of an interesting structural feature that I might want to comment on. So, you don't have to be looking for absolutely everything. You can sort of change, if you sort of spot something that's interesting in terms of structure while you're analyzing language, make a note of it. So once again, yeah, back with this. And again, what I am doing is I am specifically looking for language here. And there's some interesting verbs here, like quivered is an interesting one, hat that quivered with beaks and feathers. And again, I'm seeing some interesting adjectives. Tall, thin man wearing a large black hat. So some interesting word choice here. And I'm sort of noticing here as well, something else that I've just spotted on second reading. I've got an interesting simile here. Fragments of old window in his hands like shattered marbles. Now, that is a really interesting simile. And it's actually so interesting, I'm going to go back to my question paper because I've got a thought in my head that I want to jot down. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my question paper. I'm going to go back to question 2. And again, you can make notes on this. They're not expecting something that is perfect. They're absolutely expecting there to be little notes and scribblings and stuff like that. Okay. So like shattered marbles. So it's a simile. Marbles equals kids game. Shattered glass equals danger. Sense of danger in playing. Okay. So that's just something I sort of thought of. Didn't want to lose that thought. So I went back, jotted it down on the question paper. Okay. So I think I've picked out enough language analysis there, although I may continue to look at that. So that's taken me maybe, if I wasn't talking through this, I'm looking at maybe I'm up to about 7-ish minutes. So going through again, I'm looking at focus. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do as well is I am going to read this bit here, and I'm going to read it with what we learned about Freytag's pyramid in mind. So the main character of the short story is a boy, though we don't yet get to know his name or his age. At this midpoint in the story, right, what do we know about midpoints in the story? This is the climax or main event. So we know that this is something important. There's going to be action here. There's going to be stuff moving. Okay. Now, focus at the start. Now, remember, if we go back and look at question 3, and this will be the same in your exam paper when you take it, and all the mocks we're going to be taking up to this point. I have noticed it, what the writer focuses your attention in the beginning, how and why that writer changes this focus as the source develops. Okay, so that's my main focus here, no pun intended. I'm looking for the focus at the start. I'm looking for where that focus shifts. So I'm sort of imagining almost I'm filming this on the camera, and I'm thinking about why. And I'm just making notes as I go. So bearing in mind as well, we're looking at things like space and time. So we're looking at where this happens and what time is progressing. Is time progressing in this linear fashion, or is it jumping about? Is this all happening in one location, or is it happening in several locations? Does it end back where it started? That's a classic trick they do. They'll give you an extract that begins in one location, in this case, the mound. And again, it ends at the mound. So there's this sort of circular nature to it. It's almost a complete scene. Okay. So focus. Boy playing on mound. Light dying. Darkness. And again, we're going to start thinking about this because nothing here is accidental. It is all deliberate. The author deliberately picked this time of day to set the story in. And we're going to think about what that potentially means. So boy playing mound, light, dying, darkness. Okay. And I'm just going to sort of say here, focus, supernatural man, and I've put question mark here because we never told. Supernatural man introduced. Okay. Now, going a bit deeper, I think here what I'd also like to focus on really, because this becomes relevant, because remember, as it stands, I have already read through this. I've already skim read it. So I know that these buildings, that he's building a town or a city, is kind of important. So I'm going to sort of put this on as well, you know, the game he's basically the game he's playing. Okay. And I'm just going to make a little note of that in the margin as well. Okay. Or building the toy town. Okay. So focus, supernatural, man introduced. We're not sure who he is. Moving on from this, dialogue. Now, I need to think about why this focus has shifted. Why have we now suddenly got this dialogue between the man and the boy? Okay. So dialogue. So what's it doing to move the plot forward? Well, in this conversation here, the boy is talking to the man about building this town. The man's saying some kind of spooky sounding things, really. And I'm going to save this for question 4. Because as we see here, structure and language showing a darker or more chilling tone. So dialogue. We'll just say here, man is saying some sinister things, though not outright threatening, about the town and its lack of people. Okay. And again, I'm going to use a slightly different color here because I'm not really going to deal with this in the focus question or the question 3 really. So I'm going to use the yellow here because I want to remember this. I want to remember the bit here where it says every child is always making something. Shake them out and they're full of dust and dreams, which again seems a little bit sinister to me. You know, so I'm definitely going to be thinking about that with question 4, where I talk about how from 16 to the end, the structure and the language and other methods as well are used to create this darker and more chilling tone. So we have this conversation. All of this is still on the mound. So focus, still on the mound. And the time seems to be broadly linear. So, you know, past, present, future, no flashbacks, but it does accelerate a bit towards the end. Okay, so it sort of speeds up a bit towards the end, but we'll get onto that. Okay, and then moving on, we have a bit of a look here. So focus. Boy runs home after man disappears. And here the focus is on absence. Now, this is something I have talked about before, but sometimes the absence of something can be as important as what is there. And I'd say here, in terms of sort of getting across, and I'm going to sort of highlight this in a couple of different colors, actually. So I'm going to sort of highlight it in a little bit in mustard here. But I'm also wanting to sort of draw some attention to it as well. So I'll do that differently in terms of focus. Okay, because I think this is important for question 3 and question 4. Okay, so question 4, pace. Sorry, question 3 rather. So focus, structure. Here the pace increases. And again, I've had another bit of an idea, so I'm going to go back to my question paper and I'm going to make a bit of a note, okay? So, when the boy runs home, pace increases and less detail. This is to reflect the urgency of the boy running through town. Okay? And again, that's my interpretation. There could be other interpretations. And again, so question 4 here, which is atmosphere. Absence is used here. Something not being there when expected is very sinister. Okay. And then finally, we get this cryptic, strange revelation at the end about the boys' game. And that could fit into question 4 probably a bit more. But finally, focus at the end. The boy returns to the scene. Okay, so he returns back to the mound. He comes back to the mound. Okay. Now, that is how you would spend your time at the start in that first 15 minutes. And obviously, you're going to get a lot faster at it. And obviously, because you're not sort of talking through it, you are going to be, quicker. But you can see here, there's loads of notes all over there. You may make notes in a slightly different way to me, and that's absolutely fine. But do make notes, do highlight, and do actively read. Okay. So moving on from that, just very quickly looking at question 2 and question 3 here. And I don't want to go into too much detail because obviously we're going to be spending the rest of the session doing this. Now that you have actively read, it should be fairly straightforward to just draw out what you would like to focus on at the start. The 3, I would say, at a maximum, language features that you want to focus on. Okay. I am going to go with that opening one there, the simile, like shattered marbles. Okay, because I've got something really perceptive to say about that. I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, well, yeah, marbles is a kid's game, but broken glass is very dangerous. Maybe that's given us a hint that there's a bit of danger in this game he's playing. And again, what I'm doing is I'm drawing on what I know from the story. So the basic plot of the story is boy is playing a game with broken bits of glass. He makes a model town. A strange man approaches him and tells him that the town would look better with people in it, referring to his model town. He agrees. It looks like there might be little ants walking around in there. He runs home. There's no one home. There's no one in his entire town. He runs back to the mound. The man tells him that he's got the people in his town. The implication here is that the man has somehow transformed these people into little people to fit in his model town. Okay? So there's this idea of the game suddenly becoming dangerous and supernatural and sinister. So, with that atmosphere in mind, having read through this, and as I said, read through it actively, so not just reading it to take it in, but reading it and thinking about it, reading it and starting to analyze it before I even put pen to paper on the question paper, I know this, so I can draw on that when I answer question 2. It will take less time. And that reading time at the start is very much a case of less is more, sort of like, basically taking your time with it. It seems strange to suggest to students you need to take 15 minutes at the start of the exam before you even answer the questions, but it is true. It is what you need to do. You will get a better understanding of it, and it will save you time when it comes to answering these questions. And hopefully you've seen that here. So I might go with that one. Hands like shattered marbles. I'll probably open with that. I might talk here about Last of the Sunlight and the sort of like use of light here as well, the orange light and the shadows. So I might talk about juxtaposition there between the light and the dark. And I might also just sort of, I might mention the quivered verb there. Okay, so that'd be my 3 things to mention. Okay, so that's 3 paragraphs. Paragraph 1, the best one I've got in, and that is the shattered marbles one. Paragraph 2, light juxtaposition between light and dark. And paragraph 3, the one I'm a bit on, probably the verb quivered there. I'm not 100% sure what I can do with it. But if I run out of time, I've already answered and I've already given 2 good ones. So it doesn't matter so much. Now, question 3 is a bit different because question 3, I need to deal with the whole source. So looking back at it, I need to identify what the important focus shifts are. And I have identified 3 here. So we're looking at 3 paragraphs, right? Focus on game at beginning, right? So Dialogue and the appearance of the strange man. And finally, return to where it started, the mound. So those are my 3 focal points. Going through the story, those are the 3 focal shifts that matter the most, as far as I'm concerned. Okay. In the bit where I am talking about the return to where it started and the town, I would probably also include, I'm going to put in brackets here, also mention how pace increases here to reflect the urgency of his run. So, before I've put pen to paper, I've already got this down. I'm already starting to think about it. I already roughly know how I'm going to answer this. Now, it's a plan, of course. You may change your mind as you're writing it, but it's much better to go in with a plan. So there we go. Very sort of briefly, that is sort of an overview on how to actively read a text like this. Okay. So I'm going to stop recording now.